Have you ever wondered why a man grows restless when a woman's voice no longer rushes to defend itself? Why the silence of a woman who once explained every breath, every choice, every wound suddenly becomes more deafening than her words ever were? It is because explanation is a rope, soft enough to hold, but strong enough to bind. And when she drops it, the man is left with nothing but the reflection of his own shadow. A woman who stops explaining is no longer playing the game of reassurance. She no longer hands over her inner world to be dissected, doubted, or judged. She has understood the ancient truth that to over-explain is to stand trial in a court that will never acquit you. So she walks out, mid-sentence, not in anger, but in a quiet act of sovereignty. That is when she becomes the mirror, not a mirror of vanity, but a mirror of truth. In her stillness, a man sees his own motives, fears and flaws staring back at him, unsoftened by her justifications. You see, the compulsion to explain is rooted in the feminine wound. The wound of needing to be believed, accepted and understood in a world that taught her she was too much and yet never enough. Jung called it the anima's captivity, where the feminine self bends and folds itself to fit into the male ego's projection. Every explanation is an attempt to control perception, to soften the blow of misunderstanding. But misunderstanding is inevitable when someone is committed to their own illusion, and the more she tries to dissolve it, the more she becomes trapped in it. Men too sense this dynamic on a level they can't fully name. A man's ego will feed on a woman's explanations because each one affirms his power to keep her in a position of defense. It is not always malicious, often it is unconscious. The masculine shadow seeks confirmation of its dominance through the feminine's emotional labor. But when she no longer offers this labor, when she becomes an unyielding surface instead of a soft landing, the shadow loses its meal. That is when the projections begin to crack. For the woman, this shift feels at first like abandonment of connection. Her nervous system may ache for the old pattern, the long messages, the detailed reasoning, the gentle apologies for boundaries that needed no apology. She will feel the pull to explain herself just one more time. But every time she resists, she strengthens the spine of her own sovereignty. This is the individuation process Jung spoke of, the withdrawal of the persona's need to please, the reunion with the self. The man, now faced with her silence, must confront what her words once concealed. Without her explanations to absorb the tension, he is left with his own reflection, his impatience, his insecurities, his unwillingness to listen. And that is the danger of the mirror. It does not lie. If he is brave, he will face what he sees. If not, he will turn away, perhaps even call her cold, detached, or difficult. But these labels are only defenses against the truth of his own shadow. Her silence is not punishment, it is preservation. It is the choice to no longer spend her life narrating her existence to someone who refuses to truly see her. Explanation is a gift, but it is not owed. When she stops giving it away freely, she reclaims her energy from the endless loop of proving herself. She no longer burns her light just to illuminate someone else's blindness. There is a strange alchemy in this transformation. When she stops explaining, her presence changes. She moves slower, with the gravity of someone who owes nothing. Her words, when they do come, carry weight because they are no longer scattered like seed to unworthy soil. Men who once took her for granted feel the shift. They may not understand it, but they feel it. And it is not arrogance they sense, but freedom. In Stoic philosophy, Marcus Aurelius spoke of holding oneself steady like a rock that waves crash against, unmoved by the foam. This is her now. She has learned that explanations are waves, always rushing outward, always dissolving into nothing. She has chosen instead to be the rock, holding her truth without sending it out for approval. This is not a wall, it is a foundation. The mirror she becomes is not only for men, it is for herself. In the absence of the urge to explain, she sees her own truth more clearly. She realizes how much time she has spent living in reaction rather than creation. She sees that her value was never in convincing others of her worth, it was in embodying it, and now her silence speaks in ways her words never could. When the woman becomes the mirror, something ancient stirs in her. It is the memory of a time before she was trained to plead for her place in another's eyes. The silence she holds now is not the absence of speech, but the presence of power. The kind of power that unsettles those who depend on her explanations to feel secure in their control. Men who once leaned on her words for comfort begin to shift uneasily. They feel an invisible distance, as if she has stepped behind a glass they cannot break. This is not because she has withdrawn her love, but because she has withdrawn her submission to the endless trial of justification. Without her words to dilute their reflection, they are confronted by the raw texture of their own unresolved shadow. Jung wrote that the shadow resists illumination, and without her explanations to soften its edges, it becomes stark, unavoidable. Her stillness becomes an archetype, the oracle, the high priestess, the queen in her throne. Not a queen who demands to be obeyed, but one who knows her authority is self-contained. When she speaks now, it is not to be believed, but to declare. When she is silly, and it is not to punish, but to allow the truth to surface naturally without her interference. This is the most dangerous shift for a man who has been used to her verbal devotion. The old dance is gone. No longer will he prod at her with passive doubts or sharp accusations just to draw out a reaction that proves she still cares enough to explain. His fishing lines return empty, his questions hang in the air longer than before, and he must face the discomfort of no immediate reassurance. The game has ended, though he may not yet know the rules have changed forever. Inside her, the first stages of detachment feel both liberating and strange. There are moments when her body almost moves on its own toward the old habit, typing out a defense, rehearsing an explanation in her head, but then she feels it, the weight of those words before they even leave her mouth. She remembers how they have been used against her, twisted, dismissed, or forgotten. She sees clearly that over-explaining never brought her closer to being understood. It only brought her closer to exhaustion. So she lets the words stay inside. She learns that not every question deserves an answer. Not every accusation requires a counter-argument. Not every misunderstanding needs to be dismantled brick by brick. She chooses the rare discipline of letting people believe what they want to believe, and in doing so she watches something miraculous happen. Their opinions lose their grip on her soul. The Stoics would call this freedom from externals. Epictetus taught that the only true power lies in what is within your control, and perception, reaction, and inner peace are entirely yours. The woman who stops explaining lives in this truth. She does not fight to manage another's narrative about her because she understands that narrative was never hers to begin with. This does not mean she becomes indifferent to connection. In fact, she becomes more connected, but selectively, intentionally, with those who see her without requiring a constant defense. Her energy is no longer scattered like breadcrumbs along the path of every misunderstanding. It is gathered, concentrated, and directed toward the people and purposes that honor it. And men, the ones who are capable of depth, will feel the pull of this gravity. They will sense that she is no longer available for emotional extraction. They will find themselves leaning forward, searching for the words she does not give freely. This is not manipulation, it is magnetism born of self-respect. A man who is truly ready to meet her will find a way to bridge that quiet gap, not by demanding explanations, but by offering understanding. In time, her silence will reshape the very air between her and others. Conversations will slow, arguments will dissolve before they ignite. People will begin to choose their words more carefully with her, because they know she will not rush to untangle their meaning. Her boundaries are no longer spoken in paragraphs. They are felt in the way she holds herself. And deep within, she discovers that her silence has given her back her own voice. Not the voice that scrambled to be understood, but the voice that speaks from a place of knowing. A voice that can be as soft as rain or as unyielding as stone. A voice that needs no permission. Over time, the woman who stops explaining begins to feel a profound shift in her inner landscape. What once felt like an act of resistance now feels like a natural state of being. Her silence is no longer a discipline she must maintain. It has become her native language. The frantic urge to defend her choices fades into something almost unrecognizable: peace. The men who orbit her life, and even the women who watch her from a distance, begin to notice that there is something impenetrable about her now. Not a wall, but a depth that cannot be easily disturbed. She does not seek to convince anyone of her worth, because she has finally understood that worth is not proven, it is lived. The moment you start trying to prove it, you place it in the hands of those who may not even have the eyes to see it. In Jungian terms, she has withdrawn her projections. She no longer casts her sense of value outward, hoping for someone to reflect it back. Instead, she holds it within, knowing that the mirror she has become is for others to confront themselves, not for her to keep adjusting her reflection in their favor. This is the moment the anima transforms, no longer an unconscious prisoner of someone else's perception, but an integrated, sovereign force. She begins to notice how much energy explanation once drained from her. The hours spent crafting perfect words, the restless nights replaying conversations in her head, the emotional fatigue of always trying to be both understood and forgivable. Without this constant leak, her energy now flows into her own growth, her own art, her own quiet joys. What was once given away to maintain someone else's comfort is now invested in the architecture of her own life. And there is a subtle but undeniable change in her relationships. The ones built on dependence, on her constant reassurance, on her predictable willingness to smooth over conflict, begin to wither. Some people grow distant, uncomfortable with a version of her that does not feed their insecurities. Others step closer, drawn by the clarity of her self-possession. She sees this with calm acceptance, understanding that relationships not built on mutual respect were never truly stable to begin with. Her stillness has become a boundary in itself. She no longer has to declare where the line is. It is felt in the way she does not overextend to explain or justify. And this boundary is far more effective than any verbal defense because it is not negotiable. Words can be argued with. Silence cannot. Men who once thrived on drawing her into verbal sparring matches find themselves disarmed. The old strategies, the subtle accusations, the feigned confusion, the emotional bait, no longer yield the satisfying rush of her rushing to explain. Instead, they are met with the steady gaze of someone who is no longer on trial. This unsettles them because in her absence of explanation, they are left to sit with the only story left, their own. There is also an elegance in the way she now communicates. She does not waste language. Each word is chosen, not to persuade, but to state. And when there are no words, her presence alone becomes the message. She has become, in every sense, an archetype of the self-contained feminine. The kind Jung and the ancient philosophers both knew as the ultimate force of transformation. From the outside, some will misinterpret her silence as indifference. They will say she no longer cares, that she is distant, cold, or proud, but she knows these labels are simply the discomfort of those who cannot access her inner world without the bridge of explanation they once took for granted. She understands now that it is not her responsibility to dismantle those misconceptions. The cost of correcting every false image is too high, and she is no longer willing to pay it. The transformation becomes even more visible when she is tested. A moment arises, an accusation, a misunderstanding, an attempt to provoke. In the past, she would have met it with immediate clarification, eager to smooth the air. Now she simply watches, lets the wave crash, and remains untouched. There is no rush to fill the silence, no need to fix the discomfort. She lets the truth stand on its own because she trusts it will. In this way, she becomes something rare, a woman who does not need to be seen in order to know she exists, a woman who understands that her life's meaning is not tied to how well she can explain herself to those unwilling to truly listen. As her silence deepens, it begins to carry a strange and magnetic weight. Those around her start to realize that every absence of explanation is not emptiness, but a deliberate choice. In the modern world, where people scramble to be understood at any cost, her refusal to participate becomes a rare form of rebellion, one that unsettles the insecure and captivates the self-aware. Men feel it most. The ones accustomed to a woman's endless reasoning find themselves staring into a void they cannot fill with their usual tactics. The silence forces them into a confrontation with themselves. Without her words to act as a buffer, they feel their own defensiveness more sharply, their own fears more clearly. She is no longer feeding their illusion that the problem lies entirely outside of them. Instead, she stands as a still surface, returning their gaze with a reflection they can neither soften nor escape. In Jung's framework, this is the power of the mirror. It compels shadow work, willingly or unwillingly. For the man who is capable of growth, this confrontation can be transformative. He begins to question why he needed her to explain herself so often, why her words felt like proof of something he could not provide for himself. But for the man unwilling to face his own darkness, the mirror becomes unbearable. He may lash out, accuse her of arrogance, or retreat into silence of his own, though his is born of avoidance, not strength. For the woman, the choice to stop explaining becomes a kind of spiritual discipline. It's not that she never speaks, it's that she only speaks from alignment, never from desperation. Her words no longer come as offerings to be accepted or rejected. They come as statements of truth, and whether they are received or not is no longer her concern. She embodies what the Stoics knew, that control over another's perception is an illusion, and that the highest form of freedom is to remain steady regardless of it. This steadiness changes the way she moves in the world. Decisions that once brought anxiety, whether to set a boundary, whether to walk away from a relationship, whether to disappoint someone's expectations, now feel lighter. She does not have to perform the exhausting ritual of explaining herself into permission. She simply chooses and lets the choice stand. And in doing so, she experiences a quiet liberation from the tyranny of others' understanding. Her interactions begin to take on a new tone. People notice they cannot push her into conversations she does not wish to have. They feel the firmness beneath her calm, the quiet no in her lack of engagement. And this, paradoxically, makes her presence more valuable. When she does offer her voice, it is heard with a different kind of attention because it is no longer taken for granted. There is also a psychological shift that is less visible but more profound. Her nervous system is no longer in a constant state of performance. The need to justify is a subtle form of survival response, a lingering adaptation from a time when her safety, love, or acceptance depended on convincing others she was good enough. By stepping away from that pattern, she reclaims her body's natural rhythm. There is less urgency in her breath, more spaciousness in her thoughts. She sleeps deeper, dreams clearer. This inner restoration, allows her to notice what she once missed. She sees patterns in people's behavior more clearly, the baiting, the manipulation, the subtle guilt-tripping. Before, she would have met these with detailed explanations, hoping logic or empathy could dissolve them. Now she lets them pass without engagement, knowing that responding would only feed them. This is not coldness, it is discernment. She saves her warmth for those who have earned it. In time, her very identity transforms. She is no longer the woman who needs to be believed to feel real. She is no longer the woman who shapes herself to fit the contours of another's comfort. She has stepped into what Jung would call individuation, the union with her own self, where the approval of others becomes secondary to the approval of her own soul. And here is the paradox. The less she explains, the more she is understood by those who truly see her. For the right people, her silence speaks volumes. For the wrong ones, it will always be too much or not enough. And she has finally made peace with that truth. There comes a point when her silence is no longer simply the absence of explanation. It becomes a language in itself. Those attuned to it can read the contours of her presence the way one reads the shadows in a painting, every pause deliberate, every lack of response a brushstroke of intention. It is not avoidance, nor is it passivity. It is the quiet certainty of a woman who knows she no longer owes the world a running commentary on her being. The men who linger in her orbit find themselves pulled between two impulses, the urge to demand her words and the urge to earn them. For the ones driven by ego, the silence feels like a wound to their pride, a refusal to play the role they have scripted for her. For the ones capable of depth, it feels like an invitation to rise, to meet her not as an accuser expecting defense, but as an equal offering understanding. Her stillness becomes a test, separating the shallow from the strong without her having to lift a finger. Jung spoke of the self as a center beyond the ego's reach, a place untouched by the projections of others. This is where she now stands. She is no longer a screen for someone else's fears and insecurities to be projected onto. She is a mirror that reflects them back with clarity. The difference is subtle but profound. A screen absorbs and blurs the image. A mirror returns it intact, forcing the viewer to face exactly what they have sent out. Her silence also rewrites the rhythm of her relationships. Where once conversations were crowded with her explanations, now there is space. Space that forces others to fill it with their own thoughts, their own accountability. The absence of her defensive words leaves them no shield from their own reflections. And this is where change either begins or ends. Those who are ready will use the space to grow. Those who are not will retreat, often blaming her for the discomfort they are unwilling to face. But here lies her liberation. She no longer chases after those who retreat. She has learned that to explain herself to someone who has already decided who she is to argue with a closed door. Instead, she turns toward the open ones, where curiosity replaces judgment and listening replaces interrogation. The energy she once spent in endless self-defense now becomes fuel for creation, building the life, the love, and the inner world she once postponed for the sake of being understood. The Stoics would call this the discipline of perception, the mastery of deciding what deserves your attention. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. By refusing to let her mind be stained with the need to constantly justify herself, she keeps her inner canvas untouched, ready to be painted with what she chooses, not what others demand. She notices, too, that life feels lighter without the constant burden of managing how others see her. This weight had become so familiar that she didn't realize how heavy it was until it was gone. Now she moves differently. Not with haste, but with presence. She answers only when she chooses, and she no longer fills silences to keep others comfortable. In her restraint, she discovers the truth that silence is not emptiness, but containment, the ability to hold herself without spilling into places that cannot hold her in return. For those who meet her now, there is a sense that she belongs entirely to herself. It is not possession in the selfish sense, but a sovereignty that is immune to capture. This is why she feels so magnetic. She is whole, and wholeness is the rarest beauty of all. She is not chasing clarity from others because she carries clarity within. And paradoxically, this draws to her the very kind of man who does not require her to explain at all. The final evolution of this shift is not in how she deals with others, but in how she speaks to herself. The inner voice that once rehearsed explanations in advance, that once sought to prepare defenses against imagined judgments, has gone quiet. In its place is a steady, calm knowing. She no longer argues with herself. She no longer doubts that her choices, her values, her boundaries are valid, even without consensus. It is here, standing in this stillness, that she understands the essence of what she has become, the mirror. Not the mirror that flatters, but the mirror that reveals. And she knows now that to be this kind of mirror is not just an act of power, it is an act of mercy. For it allows those willing to look to finally see themselves clearly, and it frees her from the endless labor of explaining who she is to those who never truly wanted to know. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.